In Bath, there's a pub that's attached to a theatre, and for a long time, people working in either side have been noticing the same strange thing. A woman, dressed in grey. She's been witnessed by actors on stage, just watching them perform, completely emotionless. But then she's also seen standing inside the pub. This same woman in two different places. Now, they are part of the same building, so that very well could explain it, but with so many different versions of her supposed backstory, it's got some people questioning, is she really the same ghost, moving between the pub and the theatre as easily as she might have done in life? Or is the Theatre Royal and the Garrick's Head pub the site of not one, but two tragedies that have left something behind? Bath is one of my favourite cities, so it was only a matter of time before I covered somewhere here. But perhaps surprisingly, the place I've chosen to chat about this time around doesn't make any mention of Roman ghosts. Instead, there's a very curious story about a lady in grey seen around the Garrick's Head pub and the Theatre Royal. You get a 2-for-1 with this one, as technically there are two different places that I need to tell you about. But it's all kinda in the same building, so it was impossible to separate them out. And while nowadays, this building that houses the Theatre Royal and the Garrick's Head is right in the centre of the city, slap bang in the middle of it all. When it was first built, it was actually on the outskirts. It was built around 1720 for a guy called Richard Nash, who went by the nickname Beau. And at that time, it sat just to the west, outside of the medieval walls of the city. And so, as it was a bit of a standalone, very stately looking building, it was referred to by locals as a palace. And when you start to get to know who Beau Nash was, it all makes sense, as he was known as the King of Bath. And you gotta have a palace fit for a king. He was the master of ceremonies for the entire city. An unofficial title, but he was basically the top dog when it came to socialising in Bath. And he was the guy who really put the city on the map and made it a fashionable place to see and be seen in the 18th century. He would be the one to manage and pay musicians who played at parties, he'd pair up the ladies with dance partners, even play matchmaker and sort out some of the marriages. Really, in social standing, his opinion was law, and if you wanted in, he had to like you. He would take one look at you and decide whether you would get the tables at the best parties or be able to go gambling with high society. You had to look the part, be dressed appropriately, no riding boots for men and no aprons for women, all of that. And if he didn't like you, he told you exactly what he thought of you, although results varied on that one. There was one time in 1739 when the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, got word of what was going on in Bath, how this one man was responsible for turning it into a cesspit of sin. And so he went to start preaching to save all of these people from the dancing and gambling. But as John Wesley started preaching and drawing a not insignificant crowd, Beau Nash confronted him, complaining that his words were scaring people. Wesley seems to have clapped back, talking about how Nash was looking after people's bodies, he was looking after their souls, kind of thing. There was a bit more back and forth, but after that Nash just left. Although the only record of this encounter comes from John Wesley's own journal, so he's not exactly going to paint himself in a terrible light, surely. But the thing was, okay, yes, there were some people who weren't happy about the city turning into a Viva Las Bath. His organising entertainment, throwing weekly balls, personally greeting distinguished guests, all helped to bring in income for the city. But for Beau Nash, his love of this side of life, especially the gambling, would end up being his downfall. It said that he lost all of his money and possibly also his house, and so he had to move in with his mistress, a Juliana Popjoy, who has a very interesting story about her, which we will get to. But for all he did for the city, when Beau Nash died on the 3rd of February 1761, he was buried in the nave of Bath Abbey, just kind of going to show how highly regarded he was. Over the years, others moved into Beau's house, including at one time the renowned actor David Garrick. And there was a story which said that it was David who built a passageway between his house and the theatre, presumably so he wouldn't have to go out into the street to get to work. Didn't want to bump into adoring fans, sign autographs and get paps, all that sort of thing. However, and I'm going to be doing that a lot this episode, so be prepared, David Garrick died in 1779, as we're just about to see, decades before the Theatre Royal was built. You can't build a passageway to a theatre that doesn't exist yet, or It would be extremely difficult, surely, because it wasn't until 1805 when building work started on the Theatre Royal, taking up part of Beau Nash's former home. And on the 12th of October, they opened with a performance of Richard III. Initially, everything at the theatre was great, but by 1820, they were already struggling with declining attendance, which would only get worse over the coming decades. Which really isn't good if your brand new theatre has only been open 15 years and already people are avoiding it. But things would get so much worse in April 1862 when a huge fire tore through the theatre one Friday. The fire broke out at about 10:30 in the morning, so there wasn't really anyone around, and so the fire had already spread from the stage to the back of the gallery before anyone noticed and the alarm was raised. 2 hours later, at 12:30, the wall where the stage door entrance was on St. John's Place actually fell down. The fire was that intense. Everything inside was unsalvageable, losing all of the set pieces, entire wardrobes, libraries, orchestra instruments and sheet music, and even irreplaceable stuff like the original manuscript of Richard B. Sheridan's play, The School for Scandal. It was very quickly decided that it would be rebuilt though, and on the 3rd of March 1863, just under a year after the devastating fire, the Theatre Royal reopened with A Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm guessing they figured even with poor attendance, it was worthwhile to rebuild and try again. Into the 20th century though, and the theatre still did have rough patches. It had to close completely for 6 months in the 1930s as it just couldn't turn a profit. But then again, during World War II, it absolutely thrived and even escaped relatively unharmed during the Blitz. Just an interesting point on the pub though, jumping back to the Garrick's Head during this time in its history. I couldn't find much information telling us about when it actually became a pub, but according to Historic England, the Garrick's Head was famous for being the first known gay pub in the city, with this reputation first being recorded way back in the 1930s. The bar on the left was known as the Green Room, and it was popular as a meeting place for the local gay community. As for the theatre though, it would once again be saved later on when the building was put up for sale in 1979. It was in such a sorry, dilapidated state by that point, but a guy called Jeremy Fry could see through all of that and wanted to do something about it. He purchased it for £155,000 with the goal of turning it into a non-profit, registered charity. But while the building itself had been somewhat secured, with the state that it had got into by that point in the 20th century, it seemed like there was a long way to go before it would be up to scratch again. But through an appeal and a couple of bank loans, the funds were raised and the theatre was able to go through a much needed major renovation in the early 80s. When it reopened in 1982, the opening performance was A Midsummer Night's Dream again, the same play that they put on after the fire in 1863. Kind of becoming a bit of a tradition, that one, being the opening play after the theatre gets saved from getting turned into flats or Weatherspoons or something. Since then, the theatre seems to be absolutely alive with activity. They have kept up with renovations and things, expanded and modernised, and even in 2010 built a bar in what used to be some of the cellars to the Garrick's Head pub. You see what I mean about them being meshed together. No wonder the ghosts are seen all over the place. And so from here on out, we're going to be hopping even more between the pub and the theatre, as for obvious reasons, I cannot separate them out. And there are a lot of ghost stories surrounding this building. It is considered one of the most haunted spots in Bath. But we have to start with the biggie, as there's just so much to say. The superstar, the Grey Lady. She's been seen in both the pub and the theatre, sometimes as a misty grey shape, other times as a solid-looking apparition. Only there's no colour to her at all, she's completely grey. She's wearing an 18th century gown and is seen with feathers in her hair. Some witnesses have seen her gliding mournfully through the corridors, others have reported that she rushes past them in this burst of energy. So not only are you encountering a ghost, something that is already incredibly strange to encounter, but you're being shoved out of the way by them. Cool, got it. They've got places to be too, I suppose? In the theatre specifically, she's seen wandering the corridor of the theatre's dress circle, but usually if she's going to be witnessed, it will be in the top left-hand box facing the stage. Apparently this one's called Box C, and during the renovations in the 1980s, the Grey Lady had already firmly established her reputation, and they put up a plaque naming it the Grey Lady Box, just as a little nod to their resident ghost. So if anyone works there or has visited recently, can you tell us if that plaque is still there now. But with encounters with the Grey Lady, there may be some signs that you're about to come face to face with her, or at the very least, that she's around, as she seems to be accompanied by the really pleasant smell of jasmine. Both people in the pub and the theatre will just be hit with this jasmine smell out of nowhere, and that is thought to be her. While she doesn't particularly bother anyone when she's encountered, witnesses do describe being hit by this overwhelming melancholy. They could be having the best day of their lives, but all of a sudden, totally miserable. On the pub's side, some people have heard a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking scream, so they'll go to find this obviously incredibly distressed woman who must be in the building somewhere, to find absolutely no one. In the theatre side of the building though, staff have noticed a woman where she shouldn't be, walking through the lines of seats in the circle. Only, as I'm sure you can guess, once they get up there to go and find her, there's no sign of anyone, only the fading scent of jasmine. But apparently, sightings of this Grey Lady, especially in the theatre, stretch back over a century. There was a story that the Russian ballet dancer Anna Pavlova witnessed her, standing in that top left-hand box during her performance at the Theatre Royal in July 1920. Although I couldn't verify that, I only found second-hand stories that was what had been reported, rather than anything from Anna herself. But there was another story of the Grey Lady I came across from another performer, and this one got stranger the more I looked into it. A lot of different sources said that Dame Anna Neagle supposedly saw the Grey Lady on the 23rd of August 1975, while she was starring in The Dame of Sark. Anna was, not the Grey Lady. But it was said that it wasn't just Anna who witnessed her at this time. The story goes that there was another actor on stage who complained that there was someone in the audience distracting him, and that she'd stood up and walked off mid-performance. I mean, not a big deal, I suppose. Some people will need bathroom breaks before the interval and all of that. But what stuck out to him was that this woman was dressed weird, like she was in fancy dress or something. But at the same time, there was also apparently two other members of the audience, two girls from Canada, who were visibly disturbed by something, with some versions of the story saying that one of them screamed and fainted and had to be carried out of the theatre. The reason was because this ghostly Grey Lady had appeared on stage, in front of an audience of about 850 people, standing there right next to Dame Anna Neagle herself. And this apparition was said to have terrified members of the cast so much that 4 of them refused to set foot back on stage, and understudies had to step in and finish the play. Which sounds utterly incredible, right? Well, there was an article in the Skeptic magazine of a guy, Andy Owens, who had done a little digging into this supposed encounter. As he rightly pointed out, if this ghost really did appear in front of hundreds of people and they all saw her, there's a whole lot of corroborating witnesses. Surely it would have been all over the news. And then the subsequent paranormal TV shows coming out in the decades following would have lapped that stuff up. Strange but true, Michael Aspel would have been all over it. Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction, Jonathan Frakes absolutely would have come out asking, ever been to the theatre? And you'd know exactly where he was going with that. What I'm trying to get at is that it would have gone down in history. Someone sitting in that theatre would have got the story out. But as it was, no one was talking about it. And so Andy Owens, he went straight to the source and asked the play's producer Ray Cooney, who absolutely would have known about such a big thing happening. Your actor's refusing to continue. Only he came back and said that he had no knowledge of any alleged ghost on stage. So yeah, make of that one what you will. Another actress who potentially did witness the Grey Lady though was Lisa Goddard. This one was nowhere near as sensational, so I don't know, does that make it more believable? Anyway, she did an interview in 2012 where she talked about her encounter with the ghostly lady. She was appearing in a matinee performance of A Moment of Weakness and was on stage with Christopher Timothy when she just so happened to glance up at one of the boxes. And it struck her because you wouldn't normally see people up there for a matinee. But there this person was, a woman dressed in grey. And it was so unusual that she actually remembered to later ask who the woman was sitting in the box. Must have been terribly important. Apparently everyone got really excited and told her, you just saw the Grey Lady. That box was locked. There was no way that anyone living could have gotten in. And while I wasn't able to fully verify that one either, whether she did say that, her interview was with Mike Howell for the Shield Gazette, and it was printed on the 12th of January 2012, if anyone knows where I can get a copy of that. And so most of these stories of sightings of the Grey Lady, they seem more often than not to centre around the theatre rather than the Garrick's Head. Could it have possibly been to do with what went on here, because the theatre once pulled a marketing stunt to promote a production of Blythe Spirit by Noel Coward. They decided that it would be a fantastic idea to hold a mock seance on stage at the Theatre Royal. Only, potentially, the Grey Lady may have come through during the seance for real. Everyone in attendance was absolutely floored when the medium made contact with the spirit of an 18th century woman who claimed to be an actress. This actress went on to say that she'd once fallen in love with an actor, but when her husband found out, he killed her lover in a duel. And so, heartbroken, she ended her life in her dressing room. Just hold on to that story for a second, we're going to come back to it shortly. While all of this information was coming through, the people attending the seance reportedly heard a woman weeping. So, was that perhaps a clue as to who this Grey Lady was? Aside from it was organised as a marketing stunt, and so the whole thing could have been made up. But let's just park that thought for now. As to the origins of the Grey Lady's backstory, it is a start. Although, like so many ghostly ladies, there are a bunch of versions to her backstory. In most of these versions, though, one detail remains the same, in that her death was described as a suicide. One possible explanation as to who she is originates from the seance, that she was an actress who died after her lover was killed. Another version was that she was just a married woman who fell in love with an actor at the theatre when she used to go and watch him perform, but he didn't feel the same way. But there was one version which seems to be the most popular, especially in the older sources I used for this episode. It all started back during Beau Nash's time, so before the theatre was even a thing. It was all Beau's house, and also Beau's gambling den for his high-class mates. The story goes that a woman was having an affair and her husband somehow came to realise that he was sitting at the gambling table next to his wife's lover. Maybe someone made a joke, maybe a few too many glances at the husband by Loverboy, just something tipped the husband off anyway. Now I think it depends what type of person you are as to how you would handle this situation. This husband, in this case, having come to that realisation, grabbed his sword and either challenged the lover to a duel or just straight up attempted to stab him in the heart and kill him. Apparently he did miss the heart, but succeeded in killing the man. Word got back to the wife that her bit on the side had been murdered, and so she rushed into the room and was completely beside herself, absolutely hysterical. She ran out of the room and up the stairs, and her husband followed her. The next thing, there was an almighty crash, and the woman plummeted out of the upstairs window. Whether, like all of the other versions, she did that to herself, or the husband had something to do with it, we don't know. Almost all possible explanations as to who this ghostly Grey Lady could be do seem to centre around love, whether unrequited or forbidden, and tragedy. But then there were some suggestions about who else this woman could be, because some believe that the Grey Lady could be Juliana Popjoy, one of Beau Nash's mistresses, and the one who was with him until his death. Juliana, though, like I said, she's an interesting character. There was a legend that she was so distraught after Beau Nash died that she went and lived in a hollowed out tree just under a mile out from Warminster for like 30-40 years. And that was actually recorded in the annual register or a view of the history, politics and literature for the year 1777. So that's something. But overall, while the Grey Lady is by far the most famous phantom at the Garrick's Head and the Theatre Royal, seen more often than any of the other ghosts, again in context of a paranormal sighting, in reality we have absolutely no solid clue of who she could be. There's no record of a death on the property, there are no names attached to the wife, the husband or the lover, nothing. But when did we ever let all of that get in the way of a good ghost story? And I mean, the number of people who have actually claimed to see her over the years, it does make you think that there is something going on there. The way the stories are recorded in some sources, they do make out like there are two ghostly ladies. One in the pub, possibly the woman whose lover was killed while gambling with the husband, and then another, the actress in the theatre. But as, like I said, there are no records of any deaths like that, let alone two separate instances. But as I said before, she's not the only ghost said to be haunting this building. Some have claimed to see a Georgian-style gentleman with a large wig. He always looks to be making his way through the door between the pub and the theatre. And some say it's David Garrick, the actor, making his way back to work after a refreshment, although, as mentioned, he wasn't alive when the theatre was built. Others think that it could be Beau Nash himself, wandering around his house as he would have done in life. Would have been super interesting to know what colour the ghosts wig is. And I say that because it was obviously the height of fashion at the time to wear one of those white wigs. However, Beau, being at the forefront of the social scene and so making his own rules, he wore a black wig, usually paired with a white hat. So from then, I guess we could know whether it actually was Beau Nash or not. But on the theatre side, a ghostly 18th century doorman has been seen, usually lurking by the stage door, and he's only ever seen by members of a production's cast. I could imagine that would be quite confusing for an actor, say, to see this person who looks straight out of Bridgerton. If you're performing in a production of, I don't know, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show or something. Seems like you've been in the wrong wardrobe department there, fella. Georgian wigs not quite being riffraff's vibe. But heading back to the pub, this part of the building specifically does seem to have somewhat of a poltergeist. When Peter Smith took over the Garrick's Head in 1974, it only took a week for him and his wife to be completely terrified by the place. One of the cupboard doors would start shaking and vibrating uncontrollably for absolutely no reason. So your first thought is, oh, is it something to do with the theatre? Are they sound testing or something? But if it was, number one, surely you would hear the sound. And number two, wouldn't the other cupboards be rattling too? But things got even stranger the following week. They'd left some money in the drawer of their dressing table when suddenly they noticed that it was gone. Neither of them had moved it. There'd been no reason to. It had just disappeared. Okay, well, at the time it was strange, mildly annoying, but that was it. Until the next day when they went into another bedroom and found the money there, just sitting out on the table as if it had always been there, but no one had been in that room since it went missing. They couldn't fathom a single reason as to how that money got into an empty room like that. I draw the line at a lot of hauntings. I'm a complete scaredy cat, but I'm also drawing another line at messing with money. Don't you know there's a cost of living crisis on? Don't you be taking my money anywhere, thank you. Throughout their time at the Garrick's Head, Peter and his wife also had an infuriating time with the bar's fridge, because on 4 separate occasions, it got switched off at the wall. The plug was nigh on impossible to get to, as it was right behind the fridge in the bar. So it's highly unlikely that one of the bar staff or cleaners or someone was pulling the fridge out of place unintentionally or even as a prank. Fridges are heavy. But even though these little encounters were enough for Peter and his wife to believe that there was something going on in their pub, there were other landlords who had it much worse. There was a story that back in 1963, the landlord at the time, Bill Loud, claimed that an old-fashioned, very heavy, about 25 kilo till was moved from the top of the bar and hurled across the room with such force that it actually smashed a chair. That's not just it fell off the bar. There would have been force behind that. Apparently the same thing happened in 1996 too, although I don't think it was the same till. They didn't specify. But they did say that in this encounter it had lodged itself into a tight space after flying 3 to 4 feet through the air. Another landlord of the Garrick's Head, Peter Welch, claimed that he saw candles fly across the bedroom, straight out of their holders where they'd been sitting perfectly securely. They narrowly missed his wife, landing just at her feet. Some do say that this activity, objects being moved about, is worse when new licensees take over the pub. As if you don't have it bad enough getting into the running of a new business. Maybe they're just seeing if you're up to the task, whether you can handle the regulars. Not the living kind. But there was one landlord who, on the first day of being at the Garrick's Head, went and put his keys down on the bar. He just went off to do something alone, there was no one else around. But when he came back, he looked to the bar for his keys, but they weren't there. He found them sometime later in the middle of the floor. What a first day. That is welcome to the Garrick's Head, I think is what the ghosts are trying to tell you there. Although that same landlord was in the cellar working away when he reached behind him to grab a mallet to hammer a bung into a beer barrel. He'd put that mallet there, he knew it was there, he was alone, no one had popped down, it should have been there. Only when he looked, it was completely gone. And apparently didn't reappear for days afterwards. Kinda need that to be able to do your job. Possibly would be more useful if you went back to lobbing candles and keys, thank you ghosts. The cellars aren't really somewhere that you want to spend a lot of time anyway, as a lot of people have mentioned that they had a really oppressive, threatening vibe to them. It would be interesting to know if the former pub cellar that turned into the bar for the theatre, whether that's got the same feel now. But I mean, it just sounds about right for any underground structure really, as we're finding out in the ghost stories that you lot have been sending in. Cellars, basements, whatever, terrifying. Another reasonably common phenomenon is unexplained sounds at the Garrick's Head. Scratching and tapping on the floors has been heard, which could easily be put down to the building settling. But one of the landlords said that his family sat down for dinner in the dining room one night when they heard a knocking on the dining room door. Loud, clear as day. When he went to open the door, no one was there. Okay, that's a bit odd. When he sat back down, the knocking started again. Hate that. They eventually figured out that the only way to make it stop would be to shout, "Come in." After he shouted that, no more knocking. But I don't know, I've seen too many horror movies, read too much folklore to think that actually inviting something that I can't see into my space is anything but a terrible idea. The Garrick's Head pub also does have a legend of a mysterious ghostly bloodstain that keeps appearing no matter how many times they try to paint over it. But I haven't seen any photo or any evidence of this bloodstain. That's all I've got on that one. While all of this activity seems relatively harmless, okay, don't love your show of strength flinging a till across the room, there are stories of something much more unsettling going on, both at the pub and the theatre. These encounters are less common, so there's that, but still, would not like to experience them. Back when the Garrick's Head rented out bedrooms to guests, some of them would complain of hearing a very sinister laugh inside the room with them, even though they could see that they were alone. Others were woken up to the sensation of rope burns around their neck, possibly linking to the Grey Lady. But then I saw one line, which claimed that there was a ghost slash entity slash creature slash I don't even know how to describe it inside this building. It said that there was a, quote, vicious thing made up of many screaming faces. What spirits are you serving at this bar, good sir? What made me laugh though was that this source just mentioned it just so casually. Like, oh yeah, the Grey Lady, she's here. She's just one of many, alongside this amorphous horror that will haunt your nightmares for the rest of your days. You know, just normal ghostly stuff. But I also did come across a story from the YouTube channel Ghostly Trails, which claimed that there was a staff member in the theatre that was once confronted by a huge swirling black mass when they were alone in the corridors. Was that a manifestation of the vicious thing? I don't know what would be worse. Huge black mass in front of me or thing made up of screaming faces. Of course I know that is a silly thing for me to say. Don't be screaming in my face multiple times all at once, but both are bad. Stay away from me. Luckily, like I said, this terrifying thing isn't seen very often, but something else is. As far as I know, this one only affects the theatre, and it's created this rather interesting connection with butterflies. In 1948, there was a pantomime on at the theatre of Little Red Riding Hood, and in this production, there was a butterfly ballet, where dancing girls were dressed up as butterflies, and there was a big glittering butterfly on a backdrop, made out of gauze and all lit up with lights. During rehearsals though, they found a dead butterfly just right there on the stage. Obviously must have flown in at some point and unfortunately died, and it was seen as a bit of a strange coincidence considering the big butterfly ballet in the panto. But anyway, that was that, and they carried on and performed the pantomime. However, the story goes that the theatre's lessee, Reg Maddox, suffered from a fatal heart attack while lighting that very scene, the butterfly ballet, which, if true, that takes the coincidence from being strange to downright terrifying. The problem with that though is that that is actually not what happened. Reg Maddox didn't die in the theatre at all. He passed away in a nursing home on the 4th of August 1948. So yeah, same year, but not while lighting the ballet scene. Aside from that though, the story continues by saying that that scene was withdrawn from the panto, as some believe that after the dead butterfly and then poor Reg's death, the scene itself was bad luck, until a live butterfly was seen fluttering around backstage. The production took this as a good sign, and so added the ballet back into the show, and the pantomime went on to be a huge success. Ever since then, butterflies have become extremely significant at the Theatre Royal. A piece of the butterfly scenery has stayed hanging up in the theatre's fly tower since the 1940s. Even when the Theatre Royal was closed for the big restoration in 1981, the butterfly was taken away and looked after by the Bath Operatic and Dramatic Society, so it could be reinstated when the theatre opened back up. On Boxing Day in 1979, during the opening matinee of Aladdin, a butterfly actually landed on Leslie Crowther. He said that it fluttered down from the spotlight and landed right there on his shoulder. He scooped it up and went to release it in the wings before going back to his performance. After that, throughout the run of the panto, Leslie claimed that he kept seeing the butterfly around the front of house and sometimes backstage too. And now, even to this day, January, a tortoiseshell butterfly has been seen fluttering around the theatre, and while it's still seen as an omen of good luck, some now believe that it could be the ghostly manifestation of Reg Maddox himself, popping by to see how things are going in his theatre. Because there was a story that in 1981, when members of the stage crew were sorting through boxes of bits and bobs left over from productions, they came across an old, heavy wooden box. Not recognising it at all, they opened it up, and 6 of these tortoiseshell butterflies just flew out. The only thing remaining in this box was apparently a photo of Reg. And now these butterflies, they appear at all times of the year, Christmas time especially, which is completely out of season for them. But one thing that did get me thinking about the butterflies, especially appearing out of season, is that could it just have been that their hibernation was disrupted? They get all nice and comfy in whatever crevice they choose, but if that crevice happens to be in a theatre, with lots of warm bodies piling in and shouting at the stage, "Oh yes it is," around winter time, heating up the room, might that make the butterfly think that it's spring and time to come out? I don't know, just thinking out loud. But whether the Theatre Royal and the Garrick's Head do share a ghost, or whether there is something else going on that has just built up over time, layer over layer of history and lives passing through here, there's clearly something in this building that doesn't quite stay put. But do tell me what you think. Do we have 2 ghostly grey ladies haunting the theatre and the pub, or is it just the one flitting about the building? And how far would you run if you came face to face with the screaming vicious thing? Because I bet I would run quite far. As for my thoughts, we've got a pub and a theatre. Both places on their own, I'd expect a ghost story or 2. Put them under one roof together, and I am absolutely not surprised about the amount of hauntings. So yes, I do think that the Garrick's Head and the Theatre Royal are haunted. The part that trips me up a bit though are the attempts to explain the ghosts, where we've got no proof that a death did take place here, no jealous husbands killing lover boys, no tormented actresses or anything like that, but also the story of the Grey Lady being witnessed by 850 people all in one go. That is a massive eyebrow raise. It seems to have been pretty well debunked, so yeah, don't really believe that one. Maybe Dame Anne and Eagle on her own did see the ghost, and over time the story just got exaggerated. Who knows? I do think that the Grey Lady is the same Grey Lady in both the pub and the theatre. I think that makes the most sense, as it's all kind of meshed into one building. I don't think ghosts are fussy about where one business ends and another begins, especially if they were there before the second business was even built. But tell me your thoughts anyway, your opinions. I do read every comment that comes through, and I think that after covering Kedleston Hall and really getting into the history there, I've really enjoyed going back to topics I used to cover a lot more on my channel, and I do love nothing more than looking into a haunted pub, where a lot of the time the stories, okay yeah, maybe they're not so verified, we don't really know for sure what's said to be going on, and it's more like witnesses describe, rather than a named witness saw this specific thing at 2:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday the 2nd of February. But sometimes you just have to accept that they can't be traced and enjoy the ghost stories for what they are, because isn't that part of the fun of the paranormal every now and then? Even if I would still poke holes in all of the stories. That's just me. I'd still go for a pint at the Garrick's Head and catch a show at the Theatre Royal on the off chance that I might see something unexplainable. But if you enjoyed this episode, let me know by leaving it a little like. And if you haven't already, but you like hearing about the history behind the mysteries, make sure that you're subscribed too. I had a couple of people recently comment saying that they didn't realise that I was still creating content, which is news to me. I have been here uploading weekly the whole time. But anyway, enough of that. That is all from me today. Go get a drink of water. I need you to stay hydrated. Look after yourself. Cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. Right. Now I've finished that, my tea should be just about cool enough to drink. Yep, there it is. So the time it takes for a tea to cool down is about the time it takes for me to record a video. That's good to know.